If those words ever reach her ears, she will disappear forever. No one in the council chamber realized that the quiet Omega standing beyond the half-open door had already heard every single one of them. Claire Bennett had only intended to deliver the evening records before returning to the palace archives, but the familiar voice of King Alpha Ethan Ashford stopped her footsteps. Hidden by the carved oak doorway, she remained perfectly still as the royal council discussed the future of the kingdom, alliances, and the expectation that the Alpha King would soon choose a Luna worthy of the throne. One elder cautiously suggested that loyalty sometimes mattered more than noble blood. Another mentioned the Omega who had served the palace faithfully for years. Ethan answered without hesitation, his calm voice carrying through the silent corridor. He said he appreciated Claire's devotion and trusted her more than many nobles, but the Queen of Blackwood would never be an unknown Omega. The kingdom needed strength, influence, and political unity. Personal kindness could never outweigh royal duty. His words were neither shouted nor spoken with cruelty, yet every sentence landed like a door quietly closing forever. Claire lowered her eyes before anyone could notice the tears gathering there. For 9 years she had asked for nothing. She had never confessed the feelings she carried through endless mornings and sleepless nights. She had simply remained beside him, making certain every ceremony began on time. Every guest felt welcomed, every report reached his desk before sunrise, and every forgotten detail quietly disappeared before becoming a problem. She had believed that perhaps one day he would notice not her sacrifices but the person making them. Instead, she finally understood that he already had. He simply believed she could never belong beside him. Claire took one slow breath, straightened the stack of documents in her hands, and silently placed them outside the chamber without entering. No dramatic farewell crossed her mind. There would be no confrontation, no accusations, and no desperate attempt to change his decision. Love that needed to beg for recognition was no longer love she wished to keep. That evening the palace continued exactly as it always had. Servants hurried through polished hallways. Musicians prepared for the upcoming Harvest Moon banquet, and advisors carried reports from one office to another. Claire completed every remaining responsibility with the same gentle professionalism she had shown for years. She organized the guest registry, balanced the household accounts, answered letters from neighboring territories, and left detailed instructions for every task scheduled during the following month. No one noticed that she lingered a little longer beside the library window overlooking the palace gardens where she had once imagined impossible futures. After midnight, she entered her modest room, carrying only a small travel bag. She packed practical dresses, a warm coat, several notebooks filled with careful observations, and the modest savings she had quietly accumulated over the years. Before extinguishing the candle, she placed one neatly folded envelope on the desk. It contained no confession and no attempt to change Ethan's heart. She simply thanked the palace for the opportunities she had been given and apologized for leaving without proper notice. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the distant mountains as Claire stepped beyond the palace gates. She never looked back. The guards assumed she had been assigned an early errand because she smiled politely as she passed them. Within minutes, she disappeared onto the quiet road leading west, where a stagecoach bound for a town nearly 300 miles away waited beneath the pale morning sky. Behind her, the palace slowly awakened to another ordinary day. Ahead of her stretched an unfamiliar future where no one knew her name, no one expected silent devotion, and no promise made behind a closed door would ever decide the worth of her life again. The palace did not notice Claire Bennett was gone until the following afternoon, and even then her absence seemed like nothing more than a small inconvenience. One servant assumed she had been assigned to the Eastern Archives. Another believed she had traveled to inspect inventory at one of the royal storehouses. Her name passed quietly through casual conversations before disappearing beneath the endless rhythm of palace routines. King Alpha Ethan Ashford never questioned it. His schedule remained crowded with council meetings, diplomatic visitors, military reports, and preparations for the Harvest Moon banquet. Like everyone else, he simply assumed Claire was somewhere nearby, calmly solving problems before they ever reached his attention. 3 days later, the first cracks began to appear. A delegation from the Northern Territory arrived to discover their accommodations had never been confirmed. The royal kitchens received duplicate supply orders, while several essential ingredients failed to arrive altogether. Invitations to an important trade discussion listed the wrong meeting location, forcing embarrassed officials to rush guests across the palace grounds. None of the mistakes alone seemed serious, yet together they created an unfamiliar sense of disorder. Palace servants quietly apologized to one another, insisting they had never experienced so many small failures at the same time. Ethan frowned more often during meetings, surprised that details usually handled without effort now demanded constant attention. By the end of the week, the Royal Library could not locate several important economic reports because no one realized Claire had always organized every document according to a system only she fully understood. Correspondence from neighboring territories remained unanswered longer than usual because the letters had not been sorted into their proper priority. The royal florist prepared decorations for the wrong banquet hall after receiving outdated instructions that Claire would normally have corrected before sunrise. Even the palace clock tower rang late one morning because the elderly caretaker had relied upon Claire's daily reminder for nearly 5 years without anyone noticing. Ethan finally asked his chief steward where Claire had been hiding. The old steward hesitated before admitting no one had actually seen her since the evening before the last council meeting. Concern quietly replaced annoyance as Ethan ordered attendants to search every department within the palace. Her room was found perfectly clean. Every book rested neatly upon its shelf. Every piece of furniture remained carefully arranged. Only a folded letter lay upon the wooden desk beside an extinguished candle. Ethan opened it expecting to read a request for leave or perhaps news of a family emergency. Instead, he found only gratitude. Claire thanked the palace for allowing her to serve, wished everyone good health, apologized for departing without proper notice, and expressed hope that Blackwood Kingdom would continue to prosper for generations. There was not a single complaint, accusation, or explanation. Her handwriting remained as calm and graceful as always, making the quiet farewell somehow even more difficult to understand. Ethan read the letter twice before noticing what disturbed him most. Claire had never written his title or his name anywhere on the page. She addressed the message only to the palace itself, as though she had already placed an invisible distance between her past and whatever future awaited beyond the kingdom's borders. He folded the letter carefully and looked around the small room. Everything reflected the same thoughtful order she had brought into every corner of palace life. Suddenly, he realized he could not remember the last time he had personally thanked her for anything. He knew exactly how dependable she had been, yet he knew almost nothing about the woman herself. Outside the window, the palace continued its busy routine, but for the first time in years, Ethan sensed that something essential had quietly disappeared. It was not simply an employee or a trusted assistant. It was the unseen presence that had held countless lives together without ever asking to be noticed. And only after that presence vanished did everyone begin to understand how much had rested upon the shoulders of one silent Omega. Nearly 300 miles west of Blackwood Palace, the quiet town of Ashbrook welcomed strangers without asking many questions. The streets were lined with family-owned shops, tidy brick buildings, and rows of maple trees that painted the sidewalks gold whenever autumn arrived. Claire Bennett stepped down from the stagecoach carrying only one travel bag, a small pouch of savings, and the determination to build a life where her worth would never again depend upon someone else's expectations. No one recognized her face. No one knew she had once spent 9 years serving the most powerful palace in the kingdom. To the people of Ashbrook, she was simply a polite young woman looking for honest work. An elderly widow named Martha Sullivan rented Claire a modest room above her neighborhood bookstore after noticing the careful way she organized her belongings before even unpacking them. The room was small but filled with warm morning sunlight, and for the first time in years Claire woke without palace bells announcing another endless schedule. She found comfort in ordinary routines that belonged only to her. Every morning she walked to the local market, greeted familiar shopkeepers with a gentle smile, and quietly searched for opportunities instead of waiting for them to appear. Within 2 weeks, she accepted a temporary position helping a struggling merchant organize years of neglected financial records. The owner had expected the work to require several months, yet Claire completed it in less than 3 weeks, while discovering accounting mistakes that had quietly drained thousands of dollars from the business over several years. She never criticized anyone responsible for the errors. Instead, she patiently created a simpler bookkeeping system and taught every employee how to maintain it. The grateful merchant insisted on paying her more than they had originally agreed, but Claire accepted only the promised amount, explaining that trust mattered far more than quick profit. Word spread surprisingly fast through Ashbrook. Before long, another business owner requested her assistance, followed by a shipping warehouse that struggled with delayed deliveries, then a family-owned grain supplier unable to manage expanding orders. Claire approached every challenge with the same quiet discipline she had practiced inside Blackwood Palace. She listened before offering advice, learned every detail before making changes, and always treated the newest employee with the same respect she gave the owner. People gradually stopped introducing her as the young woman from the bookstore and began describing her as the person who could solve problems others had nearly abandoned. Even so, Claire never spoke about her past. At night, she sometimes opened one of her old notebooks filled with schedules, supply records, and careful observations collected during her palace years. Instead of dwelling on painful memories, she studied the lessons hidden inside them. Every difficult responsibility she had once carried had quietly become experience no classroom could ever provide. She realized that nothing she had given had truly been wasted. It had prepared her for a future she never imagined possible. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Blackwood Palace continued searching for answers that never arrived. Ethan occasionally found himself wondering whether Claire had reached her destination safely, but each passing week buried the question beneath new responsibilities. Neither of them knew how greatly their lives were already changing. Claire no longer measured each day by whether someone noticed her efforts. She measured it by the number of people she genuinely helped. The quiet Omega who had once hidden behind royal traditions slowly discovered a confidence that had always existed beneath years of silent devotion. She was no longer building someone else's future while forgetting her own. One careful decision after another, she was creating a life defined not by what she had lost behind the palace gates, but by everything she was finally becoming beyond them. 5 years passed with a quiet steadiness that surprised even Claire Bennett. The young Omega who had once arrived in Ashbrook carrying only a single travel bag now owned a respected consulting office overlooking the town square, where merchants, farmers, and business owners regularly gathered to seek her advice. What had begun as simple bookkeeping gradually expanded into transportation planning, supply management, and regional trade coordination. Claire never chased recognition. She focused instead on helping ordinary people solve practical problems, believing that when families succeeded together, entire communities became stronger. Her reputation spread naturally from one town to another because every recommendation came from someone whose life had genuinely improved after working with her. Rather than placing her own name above the entrance, she established Ashbrook Regional Commerce, a company dedicated to connecting independent businesses across neighboring territories. She hired young apprentices who lacked experience but possessed determination, offering opportunities based upon character instead of family background. Many of them had been overlooked for years because they came from humble homes or belonged to Omega families rarely trusted with important responsibilities. Claire recognized their potential immediately because she had once carried the same invisible burden herself. She encouraged every employee to ask questions, share ideas, and learn from mistakes without fear of humiliation. The office gradually became known as a place where people left more confident than when they arrived. Across western Blackwood, small manufacturers found new markets, farmers reduced costly delays, and local shops expanded into neighboring towns through transportation routes Claire carefully designed. She personally visited warehouses, grain mills, river ports, and family businesses, believing no report could replace seeing challenges with her own eyes. Her calm leadership inspired loyalty because she never demanded anything she was unwilling to do herself. Even after years of success, she still greeted receptionists by name, carried boxes whenever extra hands were needed, and remained after meetings to answer questions from the youngest employees. Meanwhile, Blackwood Palace continued facing subtle difficulties that no amount of authority seemed able to solve completely. Although Ethan had recruited capable officials to replace Claire's responsibilities, None possessed her remarkable ability to anticipate problems before they emerged. During one Royal Economic Council, advisors repeatedly praised a rapidly growing commercial network transforming Western trade. Detailed reports described efficient transportation systems, thriving small businesses, expanding employment, and remarkably low operating costs. Every document highlighted the same organization, Ashbrook Regional Commerce. Ethan listened with professional interest as ministers discussed the company's growing influence, impressed that a private enterprise had strengthened local economies without seeking political power. One advisor suggested inviting its founder to future trade negotiations, explaining that many neighboring territories had already adopted similar business models after witnessing its success. Ethan agreed without hesitation, making a brief note to arrange formal communication when schedules allowed. He never imagined the respected business leader discussed around the council table was the same quiet Omega, whose farewell letter remained carefully folded inside the drawer of his private desk. Claire knew nothing about those meetings taking place hundreds of miles away. She remained focused upon helping another struggling riverside community rebuild its transportation network before the coming winter season. Occasionally, she paused long enough to admire how peaceful her evenings had become. The silence surrounding her no longer felt lonely. It felt earned. She had once believed leaving the palace meant abandoning the only future she would ever know. Instead, she had discovered something far more valuable than the dream she left behind. Every sunrise reminded her that dignity could not be granted by a title, a palace, or another person's affection. It grew quietly inside those willing to believe that their own worth existed long before anyone else learned to recognize it. Early the following spring, invitations were delivered to influential merchants, governors, and business leaders across the kingdom for the first Royal Economic Development Summit, held in Blackwood Palace. The gathering had been organized to strengthen cooperation between private enterprises and regional governments, and among every respected organization listed on the official program, one name attracted more attention than the others. Ashbrook Regional Commerce had become a symbol of practical innovation, efficient transportation, and sustainable economic growth. Although many officials admired its accomplishments, very few had ever met the woman responsible for building it. Claire Bennett accepted the invitation only after encouraging her senior staff to continue managing daily operations without her. She believed partnerships created lasting change, and if her experience could benefit more communities, the journey back to Blackwood was worth making. Nearly 6 years had passed since she quietly walked beyond the palace gates before sunrise. As her carriage approached the familiar capital, she felt no bitterness. The towering stone walls, busy market streets, and elegant buildings no longer reminded her of heartbreak. They reminded her of how far she had traveled, not only across nearly 300 miles, but through years of personal growth that had quietly transformed every part of her life. Inside the Grand Royal Conference Hall, ministers welcomed distinguished guests while advisors prepared presentations describing the kingdom's economic future. King Alpha Ethan Ashford entered accompanied by senior officials, greeting respected business leaders with calm confidence. His attention remained focused on the agenda until the Master of Ceremonies announced the arrival of the final honored guest. Every conversation gradually faded into silence as the enormous doors opened. Claire stepped into the hall wearing a simple but elegant navy blue business suit that reflected quiet confidence rather than extravagant wealth. She carried no jewelry beyond a modest silver watch, and her composed smile revealed neither pride nor hesitation. One by one, governors, merchants, and regional representatives rose from their seats to welcome the founder whose work had strengthened communities throughout Western Blackwood. Ethan stood automatically with everyone else, offering the same respectful courtesy he extended to every distinguished guest. Then Claire lifted her eyes toward the front of the room. Time seemed to pause. Ethan recognized her immediately. The quiet Omega he had last seen only through a brief farewell letter now stood before the entire kingdom as one of its most respected leaders. She looked familiar, yet completely transformed. The uncertainty that had once hidden behind her gentle smile had been replaced by calm assurance earned through years of meaningful work. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed permission to believe in her own value. Ethan could not hear the applause surrounding them, His thoughts returned instead to a folded letter resting inside his desk drawer, and to the evening, when he had spoken careless words without realizing the person they would wound forever. Claire acknowledged the room with graceful professionalism before taking her assigned seat among the keynote speakers. She did not avoid Ethan's gaze, nor did she seek it. To her, he was simply another participant attending an important conference dedicated to improving the kingdom. Throughout the opening presentations, she discussed transportation systems, workforce development, and regional cooperation with remarkable clarity, answering every question through practical experience instead of empty promises. Ministers who had once doubted independent businesses now filled notebooks with observations inspired by her ideas. Ethan listened in complete silence. Every thoughtful recommendation reminded him that the remarkable leader standing before him had once spent years quietly offering the same wisdom inside his own palace, while he remained too distracted to truly see her. For the first time since Claire disappeared, he understood that he had not merely lost a loyal assistant. He had failed to recognize an extraordinary woman whose brilliance had always been waiting in plain sight. The Royal Economic Development Summit concluded with enthusiastic discussions that continued long after the final presentation ended. Yet Ethan Ashford remembered very little of the conversations taking place around him. His thoughts remained fixed on Claire Bennett. During the years she had spent inside Blackwood Palace, he had admired her reliability without ever asking how someone so young possessed such remarkable judgment. Now every answer stood before him with undeniable clarity. The strategic planning praised by governors, the transportation systems strengthening entire regions, and the confident leadership inspiring countless businesses had not appeared suddenly. Those qualities had always belonged to Claire. The only difference was that she now stood in a place where everyone could finally see them. That evening, Ethan requested every public report available regarding Ashbrook Regional Commerce. Advisors delivered stacks of documents describing successful regional partnerships, apprenticeship programs, transportation improvements, and financial growth that had revitalized struggling communities throughout Western Blackwood. Yet what captured Ethan's attention most were not the impressive numbers. Nearly every report included personal stories describing Claire's leadership. Merchants praised her honesty. Young apprentices spoke about opportunities they had never imagined receiving. Farmers explained how she patiently visited remote communities instead of making decisions from distant offices. Warehouse employees admired the fact that she learned every worker's name before discussing business plans. The more Ethan read, the more one painful realization quietly settled into his heart. Claire had never changed into someone extraordinary after leaving the palace. She had always been extraordinary. He had simply failed to recognize the quiet strength hidden behind years of humble service. The following morning, Ethan walked alone through the palace gardens before sunrise, passing familiar paths where Claire had once carefully organized seasonal celebrations, welcomed visiting dignitaries, and quietly solved countless problems without expecting acknowledgement. He remembered how naturally he had accepted every thoughtful detail she arranged, never questioning who had remained awake long after everyone else had gone to sleep. Gratitude arrived painfully late, yet it arrived with complete honesty. Later that afternoon, he requested a private meeting with Claire before her scheduled departure. She accepted with the same professional courtesy she had shown every participant throughout the summit. They met inside a bright conference room overlooking the royal gardens. There were no servants nearby, no council members waiting outside, and no audience to witness the conversation. Ethan stood as she entered, offering respect before speaking. He thanked her for attending the summit and sincerely congratulated her on everything she had accomplished. Claire accepted his words with a calm smile, thanking him for inviting independent businesses to participate in shaping the kingdom's future. For a brief moment, silence settled comfortably between them. Ethan finally admitted that seeing everything she had built had changed the way he understood leadership itself. He confessed that he had spent years believing authority came from titles, traditions, and inherited responsibility. Yet Claire had demonstrated that true influence was earned through trust, consistency, and genuine care for others. Claire listened without interruption before quietly replying that experience often became life's greatest teacher. She explained that leaving the palace had forced her to discover strengths she never knew she possessed, and for that reason, she no longer viewed the past with resentment. It had become part of the journey that shaped the woman she had become. Ethan wanted to apologize for the words she had once overheard beyond the council chamber door, but something stopped him. He realized that an apology offered only after witnessing her success would sound painfully incomplete. Instead, he simply promised that Blackwood Kingdom would continue creating opportunities where talent mattered more than status. Claire nodded with quiet approval, believing actions would always carry greater meaning than promises. As she prepared to leave the conference room, Ethan understood that earning her respect again would never happen through regret alone. The path forward, if one existed at all, would have to be built one honest decision at a time, beginning not with winning back the woman he had lost, but with becoming the leader she had deserved all along. When Claire Bennett returned to Ashbrook, she expected life to continue exactly as it had before the summit, and for the most part it did. Every morning her office welcomed business owners seeking practical solutions instead of grand promises. New apprentices filled classrooms established through Ashbrook Regional Commerce, and neighboring towns continued requesting guidance for transportation projects, agricultural partnerships, and local investment plans. Several weeks later, a formal letter bearing the royal seal arrived at her office. Rather than containing a personal message from Ethan Ashford, it included a proposal from the Kingdom of Blackwood inviting Ashbrook Regional Commerce to participate in a long-term infrastructure initiative connecting rural communities with major trade routes. The invitation clearly outlined responsibilities, financial commitments, and measurable goals. There was no mention of the past, no emotional appeal, and no request beyond professional cooperation. Claire carefully reviewed every page before quietly accepting the proposal, because the project would improve countless lives regardless of who had suggested it. Over the following months, she and Ethan met regularly alongside engineers, economists, governors, and transportation specialists. Every discussion remained focused upon creating practical improvements for families living far from the capital. Ethan surprised many senior officials by encouraging younger advisors and Omega professionals to present their recommendations first. Instead of announcing decisions immediately, he listened patiently, asked thoughtful questions, and publicly credited strong ideas regardless of rank or social standing. Claire noticed the change but never commented upon it. She simply observed that his leadership had become calmer, more deliberate, and remarkably free from the pride that had once surrounded the throne. During one inspection of a newly completed railway station nearly 100 miles outside the capital, unexpected heavy rain forced the delegation to remain inside the unfinished terminal for several hours. Without formal ceremonies or crowded meeting halls surrounding them, conversations became surprisingly natural. Local workers shared stories about how improved transportation had reduced shipping costs and created steady employment. Young apprentices thanked both the royal government and Ashbrook Regional Commerce for believing in people who had previously been overlooked. Ethan listened quietly to every conversation before turning toward Claire with genuine appreciation. He admitted that years earlier he would have measured success by the size of the kingdom's treasury, but now he understood that prosperity meant little unless ordinary families experienced it in their daily lives. Claire smiled gently and replied that lasting progress always began with leaders willing to notice people whose work often remained invisible. Ethan recognized the quiet truth hidden within her words. She was not speaking only about farmers, apprentices, or warehouse workers. She was reminding him, without accusation, of the lesson he had learned too late. After the inspection ended, Ethan walked beside Claire toward the waiting carriages. He thanked her for agreeing to work with the kingdom despite everything that had happened years before. Claire answered honestly that forgiveness did not require forgetting the past, nor did it demand returning to the person she had once been. Forgiveness simply allowed both people to move forward without carrying unnecessary bitterness. Ethan accepted those words with quiet respect because he finally understood that rebuilding trust was not measured by dramatic gestures, but by consistent choices repeated day after day. As the months continued, their partnership earned admiration throughout Blackwood. Reports described successful projects, thriving regional economies, and stronger cooperation between the royal government and independent businesses. Yet the greatest transformation appeared where no official document could record it. Ethan no longer sought opportunities to prove he had changed. He simply continued making better decisions because they were right. Claire no longer guarded her heart against every memory connected to the palace. She allowed herself to recognize the difference between the man who had unknowingly broken her heart years ago and the leader who now stood beside her, choosing humility over pride with every quiet step forward. Nearly a year passed, and what had begun as a professional partnership quietly grew into something neither Claire Bennett nor Ethan Ashford had expected. Across Blackwood Kingdom new transportation corridors connected once isolated towns to thriving markets. Apprenticeship programs opened doors for young people regardless of family background, and independent businesses flourished because cooperation had replaced unnecessary competition. Newspapers praised economic growth, governors celebrated stronger regional relationships, and ordinary families noticed that opportunities once reserved for a fortunate few had become available to anyone willing to work with honesty and determination. Yet beyond every successful project stood a quieter achievement that no report could fully describe. Claire and Ethan had learned to trust one another again. Their meetings became conversations instead of negotiations. They challenged each other's ideas without resentment, welcomed different perspectives without pride, and always placed the needs of the kingdom above personal recognition. Whenever a proposal succeeded, they praised the entire team rather than seeking individual credit. The people working beside them often remarked that leadership seemed easier when respect flowed naturally between those guiding it. During the annual Regional Progress Forum held in Ashbrook, Ethan accepted Claire's invitation to tour several community projects before addressing local officials. Instead of surrounding himself with ceremony, he walked through neighborhood workshops, family farms, and newly expanded training centers, greeting residents with genuine curiosity. Claire watched quietly as children eagerly approached the Alpha King without fear, proudly showing him inventions, artwork, and business plans they hoped to develop one day. Years earlier, she could never have imagined such a scene. The distance that had once separated the throne from ordinary people had gradually disappeared because Ethan had chosen to listen before leading. Later that afternoon, they visited the original bookstore where Claire had rented her first modest room after leaving the palace. Martha Sullivan, now happily retired, welcomed them with warm laughter and fresh bread still fragrant from the kitchen. She spoke openly about the shy young woman who had arrived carrying a single travel bag and quietly rebuilt her life one careful step at a time. Ethan listened with heartfelt attention, realizing how little he had truly known about Claire during the years they spent under the same roof. After Martha excused herself to greet other visitors, Ethan looked around the small upstairs room that Claire had once called home. The furniture remained simple, the windows welcomed generous afternoon sunlight, and several notebooks still rested neatly upon a wooden shelf. Claire smiled softly and admitted she had kept the room exactly as it had been because it reminded her that every meaningful journey began with a single courageous decision. Ethan thanked her for allowing him to see the place where her new life had truly begun. He quietly confessed that there had been many moments over the past year when he wanted to apologize again for the careless words she had overheard so long ago. But he had chosen silence because he believed repeating apologies without continuing to change would only reopen old wounds. Claire appreciated his honesty. She explained that healing had never come from hearing perfect words. It had come from watching consistent actions repeated over time. The leader standing beside her now was not the same man who had unknowingly broken her heart years before, and she no longer carried the pain that had once followed every memory of the palace. As evening settled across Ashbrook, they stood outside the bookstore watching warm lights appear in homes throughout the quiet town. Neither spoke about love or the future. There was no need to hurry toward answers. The strongest foundation they had built together was not created through grand declarations, but through patience, humility, and the quiet certainty that trust earned slowly would always endure far longer than promises spoken too soon. Another year passed, and the changes throughout Blackwood Kingdom became impossible to ignore. Prosperous towns stood where forgotten communities had once struggled. Young Omega professionals held leadership positions because ability had replaced old assumptions, and cooperation between the royal government and independent businesses had become a model admired far beyond the kingdom's borders. Yet among every achievement celebrated in official reports, one decision remained deeply personal. Ethan Ashford had never asked Claire Bennet to return to the palace. He had never suggested she abandon the successful life she had built with her own hands. He understood at last that genuine love could never ask another person to surrender the very independence that had allowed them to flourish. Instead, he continued visiting Ashbrook whenever official business required it, and Claire traveled to the capital whenever important projects called for her experience. They met as equals whose mutual respect had been earned through years of shared purpose rather than inherited titles. During the annual Kingdom Partnership Ceremony, representatives from every region gathered inside the restored Royal Assembly Hall to celebrate another year of remarkable progress. After recognizing community leaders, apprentices, teachers, and business owners whose work had strengthened Blackwood, Ethan unexpectedly requested permission to address the audience one final time. The hall became completely silent. He spoke not about economic success or political accomplishments, but about leadership itself. He admitted that many years earlier he had believed greatness belonged only to those born into power, yet life had taught him that wisdom, courage, and compassion often appeared first in people the world failed to notice. He encouraged every leader present to recognize quiet excellence before it disappeared, because some opportunities never returned once they were lost. Many people applauded his words without realizing the deeply personal story hidden within them. Claire understood every sentence. When the ceremony concluded and guests gradually filled the palace gardens beneath the warm evening sky, Ethan approached Claire with the same calm respect that had guided every conversation between them during the past 2 years. He thanked her once again, not for helping his kingdom, but for helping him become a better man than he had once believed possible. Then he asked whether she would consider walking beside him through the future, not because the kingdom expected it, not because tradition demanded it, but because he had come to admire the woman she had always been. He promised that whatever answer she chose would be accepted with complete respect, because her freedom mattered as much as his hope. Claire looked toward the palace that had once represented every painful memory she carried, then toward the countless people laughing together throughout the gardens. Nothing about this place felt the same anymore. The kingdom had changed. Ethan had changed. Most importantly, she had changed. The frightened young Omega who quietly disappeared before sunrise no longer existed. In her place stood a confident woman who understood that love held real meaning only when it was freely chosen between equals. A gentle smile appeared as she reached for Ethan's hand. She told him that years ago she had left because she believed she would never belong beside him. Today she accepted because neither of them stood above the other anymore. They would continue serving the kingdom together, each bringing different strengths, each respecting the other's voice, and each remembering the lessons that had transformed loss into hope. As the evening lights reflected across the palace gardens, no grand celebration overshadowed the quiet moment they shared. Their story had never been about a king rescuing an overlooked Omega. It had become the story of two people who discovered that true strength listens before it commands, true respect recognizes quiet worth before seeking admiration, and true love is never earned through power alone, but through patience, humility, forgiveness, and the courage to become someone worthy of another person's trust. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite moment, and what message or lesson did you take away from Claire and Ethan's journey? Share your opinion in the comments below and join the conversation with fellow story lovers. If you enjoyed this tale, please give the video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Alpha's Regret Stories. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next exciting story, filled with romance, drama, betrayal, and unforgettable twists. See you in the next story.